We're live. Hi, everyone. Really good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to talk a little bit while people log on because it takes a few minutes for people to join us. And to let you know, I'm going to introduce Beth in a minute, but I just want to let you know first about two conferences coming up where both Beth and myself will be speaking. So the first is at Zion Baptist Church in Bedworth, that's Warwickshire, and that's Beth's own church. And they'll be running a conference on September the 13th, and the tickets for adults are £5 and children go free. And then hot off the press today, Answers in Genesis are going to be doing a homeschool conference, a home education conference in March next year, on March the 28th at the King Centre in Oxford. And the adult tickets are £20, and again, children go free. So we're really excited about these conferences. We really pray that God will use them to encourage home educators up and down the country and just to raise the profile of Christian education generally. So please do look at the links. I think they've just been put into the comment section, and we hope to see some of you there. So, are we? Is it all streaming? Everything okay? Great. So it'd be great if you want to say hi. It'd be nice to know you're there. And please feel free to engage as well. I've got some questions I'm going to ask Beth about additional needs, children with additional needs, but we really want this time to be helpful to you. So if you've got any particular questions, just put them in the comments and we'll get to them. And just so you know, there's about a 20-second lag between what we're saying and what you see. So we might not quite ask the question at the moment that you ask it as well. But anyway, hi Beth, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for
So,
having me.
yeah, Beth has become a really good friend over the past couple of years. She's the only other mother I know who's got two sets of twins, and she adopted them and one more. So, would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself, Beth?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Beth. I'm married to John. John and I have been married for over 19 years. We have five children who we have adopted. Kian is our eldest. He is 14 years old. I keep thinking he's still 13. He's 14. He has severe autism, severe learning disability, epilepsy, and a rare chromosome disorder that I can't remember the name of. Then we have twin girls who are 13. They also are on the autistic spectrum, and one of them has ADHD. And then our youngest twins are boys. They both are currently being assessed for fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, have already been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So the reason I tell you all of that is just because sometimes when we're listening to these things, we want to know what's the testimony of the person who's speaking? Do they really know what my life is like? So I hope that by telling you those parts of who my children are, that gives a bit of testimony.
Yeah.
But in reality, my eldest is my funny one, and he's very caring.
Mm.
The eldest twin girl is very affectionate. The next one is extremely bubbly and dramatic. And then out of my twin boys, they are my snuggler and my helper. So those are the real introductions. If you met my children, those are the things I'd want you to know about them.
Yeah, really lovely children. And they're all adopted. And when you adopted them, were you aware that they had additional needs at that point, or was it just more apparent later on?
Some of them we did know before, some of them we were warned it may be, and some of them it was apparent at the start.
Yeah, sure. So can you tell me a little bit about can you tell me a bit about the extra things you might have to think about when you've got children with additional needs?
Sure. I mean, if
Mm.
I if I was to go through a list, we would be here all night. Because I can start telling you about the extra knives I have to buy because my son doesn't know how to grip properly, and so he bends them, or the extra washing I have to do because they still don't know how to eat without getting stuff all the way down them. But then sometimes I don't either.
Yeah.
But really, I think because we're talking about home education, um, the extra that we're thinking about is things that aren't caught. So by that, I mean most children learn almost we'd say by osmosis. God has designed them to just absorb their environment. So they watch and they copy and they imitate and we correct. And we don't think about, in the average child, teaching them certain things or certain skills or certain life skills. They just suddenly wake up one day and they can do them. And I'm talking about things like talking or eating or walking. They just do them. With children with additional needs, those things either aren't happening and we're questioning can they be taught, or we're in the middle of teaching them. And that provides a whole level of extra and intensity to anything that a parent who has a child with additional needs has to think about and live with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And can you tell me a little bit about the cycles of grief that parents might go through when they realize they've got a child or children with additional needs?
It's really helpful to be reminded that there are cycles of grief
Mm,
when you have a child with additional needs, and you didn't know that you were going to have a child with additional needs. There is a grief to it. It's not where you intended to be. It's not how you intended to parent.
mm,
So there's a grief that comes with it. But that grief doesn't just come one time and then disappear. That's it. The rest of, your life is great. It cycles back around. So every time you have to teach or do something that is different to the average child, it can cause a grief. It can cause us to be sad about what they can't do or what we wish they could do or the extra that we have. Um, and then like every birthday is a bittersweet occasion where a child turns a milestone, and usually with that milestone come certain freedoms, certain responsibilities. Uh, just the average child can do. The day that they say, okay, well, you're starting secondary, education, the day that you can stay at home by yourself, the age that you can start using the oven, those things aren't the same with children with additional needs. So
mm,
the cycle of grief is just recognizing that when there are times when we feel down or upset about it, it is right and biblical to lament and to grieve those things that are not as they should be in our children.
mm. So could you tell me perhaps a few of the milestones that you've seen your children reach and maybe some, what some of the ages, how it's been different for you than it might be with your average child?
Sure. So toilet training is one. When you potty train, you've got a group of friends and everybody's potty training at kind of 2 to 3 years, and everybody's all in it together, and everybody's got their change bags with them, and everybody's got nappies with them all at the same time. You go, whether you're out the sort of parent that goes out to a coffee shop and a soft play, or whether you're the sort of parent that meets in a park, or you're all in the same boat at the same time with the same age children, roughly.
Mm,
It's not average to be taking nappies out for your 8-year-old. It's
mm,
not an average thing to still be checking whether your 9-year-old has done a bowel movement that day.
mm.
Because if not, you can't go out because they might do it out and not where it should be. I've I've had episodes at friends and relatives' houses where we've sort of, whose pieces is that on the staircase? I think it might be one of my kids, So definitely things like that. Things like walking, talking.
Right.
People expect a 6-year-old to be able to talk to you
Mm.
and understand you. Things, yeah, there's so many things.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And often people see additional needs perhaps as a reason not to home educate. So they might give that as their excuse. I would home educate, but I've got this child and they need extra support. They really need to be in the school system to get that support. And maybe I don't feel I'm able to manage this child by myself. What would you say to somebody who was expressing that?
I think I'd recognize that it is hard and there is extra.
Mm,
I think it comes back to this root issue that we deal with a lot of parents, that we don't feel qualified to teach our children at home.
mm,
When we have an average child, we start to expose them to letters and numbers, and they pick it up, and we get encouraged pretty quickly.
mm,
When you have a child with additional needs, it can not feel so encouraging. You can feel, well, I'm even less qualified to have my child at home. Whereas I would say it's the opposite. You're actually more qualified because children with additional needs often need additional consistency. And so you can provide that as the parent. Children with additional needs will need to be taught things like social skills, life skills that often, if you if any listeners have children who are in the special school system, one of the biggest nightmares of a child being in a special school is the communication. What has actually happened during the day with my child? Um, Children who are in mainstream education. Again, inclusion is often just a nod to the word, and children end up being taken out of class and isolated regularly. So I'd say just lower your standards. What are you actually, first of all, look at what the school system is actually doing for your child. And secondly, think, well, can I do that? Can the school teach my child to wash their hands, to go to the toilet, to say please, to consistently use words? If if I can do that, then I'm on the right road and the right step. And you know your child best. That's absolutely what I would say.
Mm.
When our eldest was 2, we were told by a professional that we weren't qualified for him. In fact, the words that were used to me were, I understand you want to home educate the younger two who weren't diagnosed with anything at the time, that he's different. You will need to put him into special school. And I believed that lie for 3 years, and I ended up with a child who was crying, morose, almost on the verge of expulsion from a special school, which is pretty tricky to get expelled from a special school. Um, Before I stopped and thought, what are his actual needs? What is the purpose of his education? It's to know God and to make God known in his life exactly the same as it is in my other children's. He needs the gospel and they need the gospel.
Mm.
So yeah, don't let it stop you.
Don't let it stop you, yeah. And some people, I think, just kind of reading stories of other people, they actually feel quite forced into home educating their additional needs child because perhaps the school system doesn't cater for them. So they're perhaps not coming to home education the same way you and I did, where we were very purposeful about it and we thought it was a really good thing. And some families maybe feel like their hand has been forced and it's perhaps harder to see the exciting side about it. So could you just offer some encouragement there?
Yeah, I think that it's always encouraging to hear somebody say, "I'm really sorry, that's hard."
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard. It's hard to have a child with special needs, with additional needs. It's hard to be put in a position that we didn't plan to be in.
Mm.
As Christians, how often are our most amazing testimonies coming out of circumstances where we didn't plan to be in that circumstance? We didn't want to be in that circumstance.
Mm.
If you have a child at home because the school system can't meet their needs, just re-examine what those needs actually are. Who's defining what those needs are? And is it in light of scripture? Is it in light of what God says their needs are and the priority of their needs?
Mm.
Um, grieve that, work it out, and then consider that you might have been handed a real gift,
Mm.
that you might be in a position that you didn't want to be in, but
Mm.
God has allowed this for the greater good of you and your child, and turn that hard into a great opportunity.
Yeah, so I like that. So consider it as a good gift God's given you to think about educating in another way. And what was your experience, Beth? So had you already decided to home educate, or did you feel kind of forced into it because your children had additional needs?
So with the so we went from having no children to having 3 1-year-olds.
Yeah,
When they were placed with us,
yeah.
they were 22 months, 12 months, and 12 months.
Mm.
And education was the furthest thing from my mind. As I've come to learn, I actually was educating them even then. We're all educating our children to sleep and to eat and to walk and to talk. So,
Mm.
with the youngest two, it came quite quickly and easily. They were very bright academically. So, even just trying to keep them entertained during the day, we would learn the alphabet, and they were reading Enid Blyton at the age of 4. So it wasn't even a thought of purpose. It was more, this is easy and I like it. Let's just carry on with it because there's a really nice bunch of people who do this. With the eldest, as I say, I was highly encouraged to put him into special school, which I did for 2 years of nursery and 1 year of reception. And it went so badly that I kept just examining over and over again, what is my responsibility for this child? Who is actually responsible for him, and what does he need,
Mm,
and what can I give him that school maybe
mm.
isn't giving him? So I chose to do it for him quite purposefully. And then by the time the younger two came along, home education was just an absolute way of life,
Mm,
conviction,
mm.
and just what we believed was the right thing to do.
Yeah, so you never put the younger two in a special school. You home educated them right from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah, so
Right.
out of five of them, the
Mm.
eldest has been into reception, but none of the others have been into school, and the eldest only was in reception for a year.
Okay, for 1 year. Okay. And so feel free to put questions into the comments, people, as well, if there's anything you'd like to know specifically, or you feel that there might be some a view that Beth could offer that might help you. Now, we're both really passionate about Christian classical education. I think we're both convinced and persuaded by it. Now, what would you say to somebody who thinks you couldn't classically educate a child with additional needs?
Yeah, we are. I have definitely come to love classical education.
Oh,
Um, just like for those who may be watching who don't know what classical education is,
yeah.
it can be defined maybe by the trivium, the three ways, grammar, dialectic, rhetoric. The grammar stage is the stage of taking in information using the five senses, is how I've heard it put very concisely and easily. Dialectic stage is where you've been thinking about it, and the rhetoric stage is then when you express and go tell
Mm,
someone else about it. That works amazingly for children with additional needs.
mm,
Often, additional needs brings with it some kind of either learning delay,
mm,
or I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say learning genius. It seems to be one way or the other that they're either delayed in their learning, or take my eldest, for instance, at 2, we said to him, "Can you count?" And he went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we said, "Can you count in twos?" And he said, "Two, two, 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 two." And we said, "Can you, no, we mean 2, 4, 6." And he went, "Oh, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20." And he was off. And I
okay.
don't even know how he knew those numbers, but he
Right.
was off in twos. So the- he'd clearly taken in a whole lot of information, and I had no clue about it. So
Yeah.
the classical education takes the pressure off assessing and testing and constantly needing to examine before you move on. It
Mm,
is just you're going through the grammar stage of absorbing things, and classical education is constant repetition. And often disability services will say to you, children with additional needs just need a lot of consistency, a lot of repetition.
mm,
It also, classical education, I think, tends to be more about teaching men and women, boys and girls, to be free, to, for freedom, to be free thinkers, and to um, own consequences.
mm,
And children with additional needs need to do that just as much as any other child. So with classical education, we're always focusing on skills rather than on subjects. It's not about the subject that we're learning, it's about the skill that's coming out of it. And that's really freeing when you have a child with additional needs, because if it's the skill of organization, then that can be applied to learning how to shower just as much as it can be learned on maths. Or if it's the skill of logic, that can be applied on um, you know get the plate out before you put the food on the table, just as much as it can be applied to Latin, or to mathematics or physics. So
yeah,
if you're focusing on the skills,
mm,
it works amazingly. So I found out about classical education and became a massive fan of classical education because of how it worked so well for my most severe additional needs children.
yeah, sure. So I guess what just from some of the things you said before, you've been talking about how you do cooking with one of them, and maybe you repeat the same recipe endless times to the point where they can do it, and then they're able to do that recipe when you just say, "Can you go and cook this in the kitchen?" So maybe parents of an average child might think I'm teaching them, I don't know, some history facts or something, but you're just taking that skill and transferring it onto a life skill, really, and learning that constant repetition and then using it to serve the family. Would you say it's a bit like that?
Yeah, and I think people often say, well, what's the purpose? If I'm, what's the purpose of teaching my child with additional needs these things? So for example, what is the point in my 14-year-old knowing all the countries in the world? What's
Mm,
the point? What's he actually going to do with that? Is he ever going to visit any of them independently? Is he ever going to have a job that involves him knowing that? Well, no. There is, if you're looking at it in that way, what is the point? But actually, if you're thinking, well, the purpose of education is to know God, then through constant repetition of learning maps and tracing them and repeating that exercise, he's learning that the world that God made that we're talking about is big and varied and there are lots of people in it. And that's going to enrich his life. So those
yeah.
grammar skills, even in the subjects of geography, are valuable to him.
Mm,
And then on top of that, exactly what you said is that you can teach life skills. So I
mm,
believe we all learn classically. This is how we all learn. If we, even as adults, we have to learn the grammar of something before we think about it, before we then go on to teach someone else, whether we're
yeah.
learning piano, whether we're writing a book, whether we're having learning to be a pilot, we learn classically.
Mm,
So that's the same applies whether you're potty training, whether you're learning how to take a shower, whether you're learning how to cook jacket potatoes, whether you're
mm,
learning how to ride on a bus. You have to go through the grammar stage first. You have to have that constant repetition.
yeah.
So yeah,
And
I
you're really breaking it down, I guess, aren't you? You're taking something that people might learn fairly easily, and then you're breaking it down into very miniature steps and like nailing one step at a time. So you're just thinking, you're adjusting your expectations, perhaps that's what I'm trying to say. So
yes, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
the comments aren't working, are they? No, yeah, sorry, we've not done this on YouTube before, everybody, and I've just realised my technician tells me the comment section isn't working. So if you've got a burning question, you might be able to contact me on the Facebook page, and we might be able to see it. But anyway, we've got a few questions we're going to work through. So if you just check the nothing, yeah. So the next thing, how do you prioritise what you're going to teach?
I think that flows really nicely on from what we were just saying,
Yeah,
wasn't it? It's like what this is the freedom that we have when we're home educating is that we know our children, so we can look and say, well, what do they need to learn next? And it's so freeing. I learned this the hard way, so I try and tell it to as many parents as possible because when we removed our eldest from school, I
mm,
thought, oh, I can do this. He's at home now, he's my responsibility. So we hammered on phonics for about 8 months. We were doing phonics, 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 writing your name, writing your name.
mm,
Um, and nothing, it just wasn't going in at all.
mm,
And yet at the same time, he couldn't wash himself, he couldn't brush his teeth,
mm,
he wasn't toilet trained. So trying to do all that on top of then what I'd call maybe more academic learning, it was just really overwhelming.
mm,
So when a good friend said to me, "Well, look, what does he actually need for his future life? What's the trajectory that he's actually on? Where is he headed right now?" Um, so by doing that, I looked and said, well, yeah, he needs to learn to use a toilet. He needs to learn to be able to take a shower.
mm,
And those are the things that are important, not phonics. So
mm,
we completely changed tack and thought, okay, well, what's going to be useful to him? He's very good at sight reading, like seeing pictures and symbols. So I wrote a list of commonly used words, things like open, close, pull, push, out of order, wait, things that are just really practical words for life, and thought, okay, let's teach him those just from the visual. So we taught him those, and then we switched focus to the practical life skills that he would need to just live,
mm,
recognizing that he will probably always need support. What can he do with support? So there's no easy answer to what do you decide to teach.
mm,
And I think if you've got children in school, that can feel overwhelming.
mm,
The reality is it's not as overwhelming as you might think because you are around them all day, every day. How did you know what to teach them when they were 9 months old, when they were 18 months old, when they were two and a half?
mm,
You just did it because it was the next step, in independence, in becoming a person. It's the same with home educating, and even with additional needs, it's exactly the same. What's the next thing that I need to do? What's the next thing that they need to learn? And then you work on that. Um, every now and then it's helpful to draw back and zoom out and look at, what's going on around them, where they're headed, what, advice from other people. I found that really helpful. But generally, day to day,
Mm,
there's no need for a baseline because you are their baseline. You know what they can do because they're your
mm,
child. And there's
mm,
no need for targets because you want them to improve and you're going to see when they can, and then you're going to move on to the next step.
mm. So what are some of the things you're trying to work on at the moment with some of your children? Can you give us an idea?
Yeah.
I know in your mind you're always thinking.
With the eldest one, we're working on travel training and using a mobile phone to
All right.
ask for help. So he's very excited about that.
Yeah.
We are a very low screen house, and none of our children have mobile phones. So we
Yeah.
have a family phone that is a spare phone. So he has been working on taking a bus and going around the shops with his support worker for the last 18 months.
Mm,
And it's got to the point now where we know what he's good at and what he struggles with.
mm.
And he knows, so he can tell you the names of the buses and the numbers of the buses and
Yeah.
you probably some of the timetable. And he gets very frustrated when the buses are late and he doesn't know and he's,
Quite
do I
right.
wait or not? So we're introducing using a mobile phone. So we sat and had a little lesson on the sofa the other day. You know, what would you do if the bus was late? I'm going to send mommy a message, yeah. So he was sending me little voice notes all through the day.
Okay.
Things like he actually is now at the point where he told me one word was tricky
Right.
to spell. I can't remember what word I said, if the bus is delayed. He said, delayed is a tricky word. I said, well, what would you do? And he said, oh, I'll voice note you. So,
Yeah.
it's just giving him those skills and then making sure that he's confident because the goal is that one day he gets on the bus, goes to Tesco's, gets a loaf of bread and a tin of beans, comes home and makes himself baked beans on toast.
Wonderful.
And
Okay.
that goal for me right now is for when he's 17. So that's a 3 years away goal, just to put this into perspective.
Yeah.
It's going to take us a long time to get there. And I know that there are some things that haven't changed for him in the
Yeah.
last 12 years. So for the last 12 years, he has struggled to wait. And
Mm,
so I know that when he's 16, 17, 18, he's going to struggle to wait in exactly the same way. So giving him the phone with a Stagecoach app on it means he can look and see exactly where the bus is and track it to his position, and it's going to help him to wait. And I struggled with it for a little while. Do I want him just standing at a bus stop staring into a phone? And then I asked myself, what will he do when he's an adult? When he has freedom to make his own choices, what will he do? He'll stare into the phone at the app until it comes. And I'd rather he did that than, we've all been there, with love and patience when there's an adult with additional needs walking up and down going, when's it coming? When's it coming? What's going on? And nobody really knows how to help them. I would rather he have a mobile phone in his hand and look at an app and be able to call me and say, Mommy, the bus is late. Can you come pick me up? So
yeah.
it's those kind of things that, we're constantly evaluating,
Mm,
constantly thinking through,
yeah.
making a decision, putting it into action.
Yeah. And so you can read a bit now then.
He
So you,
can.
yeah, I remember you saying you decided not to teach him to read, and then anyway, he somehow did it anyway.
It's amazing what God does, right? You
Yeah.
change your focus and you take the pressure off and you stop trying to measure it.
Mm,
And I think another big thing with having children with additional needs is trying to find their their motivation.
mm,
A lot of children, especially like Christian home educating mums, we say we want them to be internally motivated, intrinsically motivated. We want them to honor God, we want them to honor their parents, but ultimately, we want them to have that with no external sort of bribery systems, as it were.
yeah.
That's a big extra with additional needs, especially with children on the autistic spectrum. They really struggle with intrinsic motivation. So you have to try and find something that they want to work for. Um, our eldest loves food. Like he absolutely loves food. So we whenever we went out to eat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we all love food. Um, not all of them do actually. That's another struggle we have. Two of mine actually don't like food, and
Okay.
it's meal times are interesting at our house. One child's trying to take all the food, and the others are trying to fob it off. Um, but yeah, the we would go out to eat as a family. It's one thing that we really love to do. And we would tell him that he needed to look at the menu and wait until we had time to read it. And he would, he'd learned all his letter sounds, so he'd frantically be trying to sound out the letters so he could figure out what he could order from the menu. So things like that. And he's had a really great support worker for the last couple of years. That has who's been able to get alongside him and do some more proper phonics work with him and sight reading and things like that. So again, just practicing and giving him the opportunity, and he's come on a long way.
Yeah, brilliant. So, did I say how do we measure success? I can't remember if I asked that question. How
I
do you
don't
measure
think
success?
so.
No. An interesting question for all mums, I think. How do we measure success? Not very easily. Not for us always to know the work we've done, is it? So,
No.
how would you answer that?
So I think for any parent with any child, it's very much, isn't it, that we say to ourselves, our responsibility is to be faithful
Hmm.
and to glorify God,
Yeah,
and then the outcome is in His hands.
yeah,
And so how do we measure success? And no, I know that this is a big answer, but we measure success by getting to the end of the day and saying, Lord, help me to see, did I honor you today? And we are pretty good at knowing, aren't we, when we did and when we didn't.
yeah,
We know when we have failed in that regard. And I think that is a better use of our time measuring. Our self-evaluation is better put on, you know, on our knees before the Lord. Did I honor you today? And where I didn't, help me to get better at that. Then it is thinking, well, can my child do this yet? Because I'll give you a quick example. We taught name writing to one particular child every day for 6 months, and then he could finally do it, and we were so excited. Look, he can write his name, he can write his name. We're showing off to everybody, he can write his name. We went on holiday for 2 weeks and came back, and I said, here's a card, can you sign your name? And he couldn't do it.
mm,
So we took a 2 week break, and I bawled my eyes out because it felt like a complete and utter failure
mm,
because I was measuring success the wrong way. You
mm,
know, measuring, there are successes, there are huge celebrations that may seem small to those who don't have children with additional needs, like the day he actually just remembered to write his name, whether we were on a 2 week break or not, the
mm,
day we were out of like everybody in our house was out of nappies, the day everybody's not needing to be monitored for toilet training. There are so many small successes, eating with a knife and fork, those kind of things are huge. But I think they are celebrations and things to be thankful to God for, rather than necessarily measuring ourselves against them.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's really good. Yeah. So linked onto that, how do you keep going when progress appears slow?
I kind of already answered that, didn't
Yeah.
I? Yeah, it is that being faithful. It is just
Yeah.
being faithful. You can't look at their progress, but we can look at our own.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes just zooming out and just reminding ourselves where they were and
mm,
where they are in the big picture. And we try not to do that. I think when you have a child with additional needs, you try not to focus on the big picture too much because you just don't know where they're going. You could think their trajectory is like this, and then they suddenly go like this, or they suddenly go like this. So you really can't look ahead to the future too much. So you're very much parenting, educating, day by day, week by week,
mm,
working on plodding along. Sometimes it's really good to just zoom out and say, where are they now? Where would they be if I hadn't been doing this or this or this? Where have I seen fruit?
mm,
And ultimately just throwing ourselves onto the Lord and saying, this is really hard right now. I'm not feeling like I'm seeing any successes. I'm not feeling like I'm celebrating anything. And then, going to good friends and saying, help me
mm.
to work out, am I being faithful? Because if I'm being faithful, then I can carry on regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I think we all sort of struggle to with comparing our children to other people's children. So how do you trust God's sovereignty in your life here?
a good question. Yeah, I mean, really, the part of the question answers the other, doesn't it? Because we
Yeah.
don't compare because we trust God's sovereignty. How do we trust his sovereignty? The biggest lesson I think that I've learned over the last few years is to not separate his sovereignty from his goodness and his love and his kindness
Mm.
and his mercy and his grace. And so often when things go wrong is when we're tempted to apply, well, God is sovereign, God is sovereign. But if God
Mm.
is sovereign and he's not loving and good and kind, then actually that's not a comfort at all. So how do we trust his sovereignty? We remember that he isn't sovereign alone, he is sovereign along with all of his other attributes. And so when those things happen, they are for our good, genuinely, because he knows us, he loves us, he's kind, he's good, patient, long-suffering towards
Yeah.
us. We trust his sovereignty in that way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think when you've got children with additional needs, maybe because the differences are a bit clearer, is it perhaps easier not to compare, or do you think every mum would struggle with that kind of thing?
Well, it's interesting you clarify that because I was wondering whether to sort of answer that a different way. And
Yeah.
so, yes, I think in one sense it's easier not to compare in that it's easier because we don't want to see. I don't want to think about what another 14-year-old is doing right now because that's going to cause too much pain and grief to my heart and it's not going to help me. So I am content to just watch my child and plod along with my child. However, sometimes with additional needs, it's not a bad thing to just zoom out and compare sideways and look what would an average 14-year-old be doing and be able to do right now. Because when
Mm.
we do that, what we can see is actually this is why things feel pretty tough right now. This is why things feel harder. This is why the going seems rough. Because by this stage in life, I should be able to be doing X, Y, Z, but I'm not because of these additional needs.
Mm.
And that helps us to just maybe go through that other cycle of grief or to lament that and to bring that before the Lord and to say, this is really difficult for me. I'm seeing what other 14-year-olds are doing, and I would love my child to be able to do that, but they're not.
Mm.
Then having done that, we can go back and look and be
Yeah.
content with the child that we've got. But
Mm.
sometimes, yeah, so I think yes and no. It's in some ways it's easier to not compare, but not always for the right reasons.
Yeah.
We should be able to rejoice with those who rejoice. We should
Mm.
be able to rejoice with our friend's 14-year-old who has stayed home alone or gone off on a trip or taken their first solo flight
Mm.
without being envious or upset that our child can't. So we
Yeah.
should be able to do those things,
Mm.
and hold that also in the same space as being able to say, I grieve that my child has not done that, and possibly won't ever do that.
Yeah, so that's a real work in the mother, isn't there, at the same time?
Yeah.
Somebody's just asked this. I'm just reading it out, Beth. So do you have, I think, yeah, do you have suggestions of resources better suited to teaching foundational skills to a special needs child, e.g., teaching reading? The teach yourself in 100 lessons is probably not going to work. So
I love that you
over to
mentioned that
you.
book. I love that you mentioned that book because I have 5 children. Obviously, I've
Right,
told you what they are like, and I tried that book with every single one of them
right.
and was
Yeah.
like, who uses this? That's
Okay.
It's not a slight on the author because I'm sure it works for many, many children.
Yeah.
Um, so, in brief, there is a really great resource called Toe by Toe, which I love because often we say step by step, but this is called Toe by Toe, and it
Okay.
is a specific reading phonics-based program for teaching children with a learning disability how to read. And I credit that with how our eldest can read. It breaks it down so small. It's just Little Red Book. Highly recommend that.
Yeah.
Um,
What was the name again? Toe to toe.
Toe by Toe.
Toe by toe. Okay. Okay, that's really useful. Um, so let me just move on a little bit. So talking about the fruit now, so I'm sure you wouldn't swap your life for anybody else's life. There's a lot of fruit, isn't there? And your children are lovely to be around. We love having them in our house. So can you tell us about some of the benefits of home educating your additional needs children?
I think you're right. There's too many to count.
Yeah.
Uh, one of the things that I've been meditating on recently is that we parent for relationship.
Mm,
Parenting is about relationship. Firstly, obviously, we want our children to have a relationship with God. We
mm,
want them to love Him. We want them to know Him. And so, that is our, to honor God in how we parent. That is one of the things that we want. We also want them to have a relationship with us.
mm,
And so, I have a wonderful relationship with all of my children
mm,
because I know them, because I'm around them all day, every day. And I don't always get it right, believe it or not. I'm not perfect. And I fail regularly and often. Um, but there are just so many benefits. I mean, firstly, there's the same benefits as all home educators, but maybe is more applicable to children with additional needs, is that you can go places when it's quieter. And I mean, I'm not, we all love that as home educators. I literally don't go to places in the summer. Other people would be, okay, well, I'll go, but oh, it's busy today, isn't it? I just don't go. Like
mm,
my kids cannot queue. And when I make them, because every now and then it's good for them, you don't want to be the person in front or behind my family in a queue. I guarantee you, it's not lovely. And it's very sanctifying for me to parent them in that situation. So, just very practically, it's quiet all the time. You can go places when, it's quieter and slower, and you can just take your time and nobody's rushing you, nobody's making you wait. So that's amazing. But in terms of the fruit I've seen in their lives, I think three of them have professed faith in Christ. They love Jesus in their own way. They've been able to form a testimony and to speak to us about that. I've been able to really disciple them
yeah.
well and disciple them with their additional needs as well. So, for example, one of the things we talk about is that autism is inherently selfish. It wants what it wants, an autistic brain, maybe more so than the average brain.
Mm,
And so, we acknowledge that and we say, okay, this is a struggle that the Lord has given to you. How are you going to ask Him to help you with that? How are you going to, another difficulty that children who are on the spectrum really struggle with is understanding tone of voice or sarcasm or jokes.
mm,
Um, so how are you gonna honor the Lord in that? How are you gonna have grace in your speech when you struggle to understand tone of voice? So
mm.
we've seen, a lot of fruit in those areas because we've been able to say, okay, we're not doing maths today. We're just going to have a practice session on how to talk nicely to one another. Yeah.
Right. Great.
So yeah, exactly. Actually, that's more important than the
Yeah,
maths.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, there's lots of fruit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And how do you go about sort of sharing with them about the Lord? So I always remember you said your oldest, I think he says as his testimony something, I can't remember, but I trust God's to watch over me until he takes me home. Is that it?
Yeah.
What's his testimony? It was a
He
really
says,
lovely one-liner. Yeah.
he says, yeah, he says, I love Jesus and I want Jesus to take me safe to heaven. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, I mean, it's just a very sort of lowering your language level,
Yeah.
yeah, and being able to do that one to one. So again, there are so many similes and metaphors in the way that we speak
Mm,
to one another, and even when we preach the gospel, we are using illustrations all the time.
mm,
And children with autism just really struggle with that. I mean, even today, I've got a 13-year-old, we're listening to an audiobook. And on the audiobook, it says, the mum was talking and she was on her favourite hobby horse. And my daughter looked at me and said, was she really on a horse? And I was like, no, that's just a figure of speech. But she'd never heard it before. So, we use so many of those figures of speech in our speech. And when we're, talking about the things of the word and the gospel, we have to just really think through how can I be straight? And, with they're also very, and we've talked about this, very analytical.
mm,
They like things to be predictable and measurable
yeah.
when they're not always. So,
Mm,
how do you measure your sanctification? How do you measure your behavior before the Lord on a day-to-day basis?
yeah.
So we had a conversation with our eldest son a few months back where he just had a really bad day, and
Mm,
we John and I called him in and we listed firstly, very slowly and calmly, the 5 things that we felt he had to be thankful for. He has a home and he has his God and he has his mummy and daddy and his support worker had come back after an absence and he had a bedroom. And then and then we told him all the ways that he had not shown thankfulness by complaining about having to tidy his bedroom and dishonoring his mummy and daddy. And as we were slowly talking to him, tears filled his eyes, and he was just so convicted, just by the facts on the page in front of him
Mm.
and the mathematical equation of this many things to be thankful for and this many, bad behaviors.
Mm.
And he started to cry and said, I think I am 75% of the way to being a good man. And I mean, it's just so sweet, but you just have to adjust how you're talking because that's how he measures things. And then,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
then we had to say to him, well, nobody is 100% good,
yeah.
not now. Nobody is 100% good. And just remind him when we are not 100% good, how do we know that, we are going to heaven?
Mm.
Because Jesus will keep me safe to heaven. Yeah,
Yeah,
Jesus will
yeah,
keep you safe. So it's just, that kind of practical, low language level, loving
yeah,
them away, explaining it to them.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, and also not underestimating what the Holy Spirit can do when they're
Mm.
sat in church, when they're under the word.
Mm.
It's him that does the work, not us. So he gives us the words and he gives the increase in our children's lives.
Mm. I remember you said one time this child used to respond with anger when you spoke about God's
Yeah.
word, and now it's with conviction, so you can really see the work of the Lord in him, which praise God, wonderful. And your children, you take them to church and they sit in church with you and
They
they
do. And
manage
again, yeah, I mean, sitting still is difficult. I get
Yeah,
you. Church is hard for
yeah.
children with additional needs. It's not the easiest of places. The expectations are just against everything, that they would find easy. For
Mm.
us, it was a priority to us to have our children under the word of God and worshiping with us week by week. And so we don't expect them to sit still at home, apart from the 20 minutes of family worship and at the meal table. So in an average kind of 12 to 13-hour day that they're awake, there is maybe an hour at the max in short chunks that they're expected to sit still. They don't do schoolwork sitting still. They have rocking chairs and motion chairs and fidget toys, and because it's okay to lie on the floor or hang backwards off a sofa while you're doing your maths or you're reading. I don't care, but you do have to sit still in church and you do have to sit still, at home. And again, during family worship. So you build those things up, we
Mm.
start off with just staying in one place and the legs and the arms are everywhere. But if you're in one place, then that's fine. And then
Mm.
we slowly work on the legs and then we work on the arms and then we
Right.
work, again, just breaking it down.
Yeah, very classical. Teaching them to sit still. I love it. It's
You teach
brilliant.
it still one step at a time.
Yeah, one step at a time. Very good. So, just another question for those of us who don't maybe have additional needs children, when we come across them in our lives or in our churches, um, what, how can we speak to them and respond to them in a way that's helpful that parents would appreciate?
I think watch how the parent is speaking to them and dealing with them first. I always try and model to people. So for example, our eldest has a really slow processing speed, and that silence while he's processing is deeply uncomfortable for most people.
Yeah.
Um, and we fill it with another question, which he then starts to process. And by the end, they think he can't answer any questions. Whereas if, what I try and model is I ask him a question and then I wait. And if they start to talk, I will actively go 1 minute. And and he
Yeah.
will answer the question. So I think look to the parent and see how the parent is interacting with the child. Also in terms of like our voice tone, I've had it where people have really spoken to my child in a real baby voice, and
Mm.
he's 14, and he likes to be spoken to like a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
So, but then by another standard, some children wouldn't be able to understand the sort of language. So I think look to the parent,
Mm.
get alongside the parent, and don't assume that what you see is what's going on at home underneath. I mean, we can all be that way. Us Brits who are very kind of stiff upper lip, aren't we? And how are
Yeah.
you? I'm fine, thank you. I'd just say that's again, it's just one of those extras that's on a deeper level when you've got, somebody who who's got a child with additional needs.
Mm.
Sometimes it's just too much to talk about. It's just a lot, and it's a lot to break down. I mean, we've spent 45 minutes, 50 minutes talking about it and haven't really scratched the surface of
Yeah,
what
yeah,
daily
yeah.
life is like. So,
Yeah.
um, maybe rather than saying, "How are you doing?" say something like, "I know it must be pretty hard. How can I specifically pray for your heart this week?"
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
assume that it's difficult and then offer to pray or to help or to talk.
Yeah. Very good. So I've got a couple more questions before we wrap up. So if anybody else wants to ask something, then I think it's working now. Um, how well could you compare where they are now to where you think they might be if they'd been in government schools for their education?
That I mean, that's a hard one because I just don't know. I mean, I really, it's
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, to be honest. There are so many things that my children can do because we've had the time to consistently go over them over and over and over again. Um, so in a nutshell, I think they're way further along than they would have been.
Yeah.
Uh, I also think there's an innocence to, like, one of the things with children with special needs, you often find that they're just what's called echolaic, which means they speak in repetition, words and phrases that they've heard. Um, if they're at home listening to worship music and Christian conversations, that's what they're going to echo if they're at school and they're hearing language. And I remember years ago, a very lovely friend said to me that her daughter, who was in school at the time, used to sit on her bed at night and just shout out words. And she'd taken to having to shut the door because she didn't want her younger children to hear what those words were. Now, my child did exactly the same thing, but he was shouting out the lyrics to the worship music that we'd been listening to that day. And I was just really, the age gap was very different at that time. But one of the things it really did for me was just convince me that I wanted to do this for as long as I could, just to keep their minds clear and unspotted from the world as much as possible.
Mm. Another question. How would you encourage, I think it means how would you encourage people with a severely disabled child to come to church?
I think I'd encourage them just to do it.
Mm.
Just do it. And churches can be very different. Let's just say that, our church is extremely small. It's very quiet. It's not very busy. I can see where my children are at all times. That's a big help to me. If your church is bigger and noisier, then it's going to be harder. However, I'd say that often those churches are hand in hand, with things like relays and creches. So I'd say find a way to do it. So, and don't be scared to go to leaders of churches to ask for ways to make it easier.
Mm.
So if it's easier to have a room where you can take them, if it's easier for someone to come alongside and help. And there's a lot of work that needs doing in order to help with a child with additional needs. So you could ask me to watch one of your children for half an hour while you nip to the shops, and you would know that they would pretty much be okay for that half an hour. If you've got a child with additional needs, and especially a severely disabled one, you don't know who they might kill in that half an hour while your back's turned. And, I mean, literally, yeah, another time just ask me how close we came several times. Just you turn your back and they're pushing someone down the stairs, or they're big enough to throw a chair across the room but they're still having toddler tantrums. That it's not it's a big deal to,
Mm.
and they don't trust, they like familiarity. So, don't be scared to ask someone for what you really need.
Mm.
Can you find someone in the church who's willing to come to my house for an hour a week to get to know my child so that in 2 months' time I can leave them with them for half an hour? Because that's probably what it will take. So the church sometimes offers to help, and we say no, thank you, because it's such a big ask. But don't be
Mm.
scared to ask for the help that you really need if your church is big enough to offer it.
Yeah.
And also just remember that You know, Jesus was the one that said, "Let the little children come," and I don't think he would have meant that for only the neurotypical ones or the
Yeah.
non-disabled ones or the average child. You know, they have a place in church, and yeah, it might be uncomfortable and it can be difficult. I've been there. I've had the child that is running up and down everywhere, who is shouting out during the sermons and singing at the top of his voice in a tiny little room and where he didn't know the words. You know, but just it's got better. It's got
Yeah.
easier. It's what we
Yeah.
do, and it's
Yeah.
blessed us.
And it's just the church, I'm sure, richer for having all these children in the church. So, and are there any resources that have been a particular help to you, or any that you could recommend to people who've got children with additional needs?
Yeah, firstly, I think I would like to recommend Care for the Family
Yeah.
have what they call an additional needs befriending service.
Mhm.
So if you go to Care for the Family and or just put into, you know, a search engine, you know, Care for the Family befriending additional needs, you can contact Nicola Watson at Care for the Family, and she can put you in touch with somebody who can just listen and
Yeah.
just it is what it says on the tin. If you're lonely, it's somebody who can befriend you.
Mm.
There's a poem called Welcome to Holland.
Mm.
Again, if you put into a search engine, Welcome to Holland, you know, special needs, additional needs, you'll find it. It's beautiful. It can help in that, you know, especially in those initial stages of grief, if you've just found out that your child's got additional needs or you still haven't really reconciled with it. It's a really, really lovely poem. And then honestly, when I was thinking about this, the best resources have been the ones that have tackled the issues that have come up in my own heart as I've parented children with additional needs. So I think one of the biggest struggles and battles that we might have, just generally as Christians, I've really come to believe this, but also maybe especially with when you have children with additional needs, is envy. Envy just ruins everything, but it's so easy to feel envious.
Mm.
And there's a lady called Tilly Dillahay who wrote a book called Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Colour Your Joy. And that book changed the way that I think about everything. It was a massive, massive encouragement to me. And Jerry Bridges' book, Trusting God.
Mm.
I've recently started that, and that again, just what I said at the start about trusting God's sovereignty, His goodness, His kindness, His love. Most of that has come from that book. And when you're in the thick of it with any trial, but you know, in this instance, we're talking about parenting children with additional needs, being able to have a real firm grasp on why and how we can trust God to be
Mm.
working this for good in our lives has been really helpful, more helpful to me than the countless books that I've read on how other people's lives are equally as hard as mine with their
Right.
own
Yeah.
children, you know,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
all different. And as lovely as it is to hear that somebody else is struggling, I don't think it's had the same impact on my life as those things.
Mm.
And the last thing I would recommend, I think, if you're watching this and you know me, you've probably had this recommended by me, is John Piper did a 2-minute clip on grief.
Mm.
And it's transcribed underneath. And the summary of it is every now and then grieve deeply that loss, the way
Mm.
you wished it would have been, and
Mm.
then get up, wash your face, and go live the life that God has given you to live.
Mm.
And I reread that and listen to that
Yeah.
pretty regularly and recommend it to a lot of people.
Yeah. Very powerful. I think there's another question here. Um, we're in a tiny church plant, 5 families, but looking to encourage a friend's son to come. Thank you. Oh, it's not a question, but a comment. So it sounds as though they're looking to encourage a friend to bring their child with additional needs to church. So that's really good to hear. So, and I think that's the last thing. It's been really good to talk, Beth. And there might be people who want to get in contact with you. And I think we thought the best way is probably through my Leading Them Out Facebook page, and then I'll put them in contact with you. So feel free if you have any questions or just wanted to ask Beth about something or explain something, then feel free to get in contact with me and I'll try and put you in touch. Is that everything there? that was so helpful. Thank you very much. So yeah, thanks, Beth. We really appreciate your time, all your wisdom that's been distilled over the years.
The Lord,
into,
only from him.
yeah, yeah. But I've enjoyed listening to it just more casually at double speed. We're trying very hard to speak slowly, aren't we? We normally get a lot more said in 1 hour. Both talk very, very fast. But it's been great to have you, Beth. And thank you everybody for listening in. We've had about 15 people watching. I think that's really great. And hopefully we'll have Beth on again next year and we can just delve back into the topic and explore a little bit more. So thanks very much and God bless.
There you go.
It's ended.